From Sacramento State, this is Beyond J, taking conversations from campus to the world. I'm your host, Phillip Altstatt. If you've been to an event at Sacramento State recently, you've probably heard the university's land acknowledgement. It's Sac State's way of acknowledging the native peoples who have historically occupied and still occupy the land the university sits on. But more than that, it's a commitment to build relationships and better serve Native nations and communities. A big new part of that work is the creation of the Sacramento State Native American College announced last fall. It's the first of its kind in California and will offer students an inclusive, Native-based education that fosters connections to community and tribal government. To serve as the inaugural dean, there's probably no better than Dr. Annette Reed, an enrolled member of the Tolowa Dini Nation. She was one of the first California Native women in the state to earn a PhD and is a longtime educator and advocate for Native students. Most recently, she was a professor and former chair in the Department of Ethnic Studies at Sac State. Today's episode is a little longer than usual, but I'll hope you'll stick around. Dr. Reed has amazing stories and insight to share. Dr. Reed, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Now, you've spent so much of your career in education and fighting for Native students in education. For Native students in the past, education has meant being forced into a boarding school where, their histories and cultures were essentially erased. And I'm just wondering, I understand that that's something that your family has a history with, and is it okay if I ask you about that?
Sure.
Okay, so why don't you tell me what your history is there?
Well, I think that there's been basically 3 U.S. policies for Native people. It was either extermination, removal, or assimilation. And so in the late 1800s, they decided that was right after a lot of the Plains Indian Wars had been over. Some of the prisoners from those were taken to Florida at Fort Merriam. And so Richard Pratt was in charge of them down there and had decided that we're going to start teaching them to read. So local volunteers started teaching to read English and all of these different things, put them in military uniform, teach them, Christianity. In other words, leave everything that was Native behind. So after this, they decided, well, maybe it would be good to have boarding schools. And so one interesting fact I always tell people about is looking at Pratt. He thought, well, General Sherman Armstrong was running a boarding school for black, students. And the idea was to assimilate them. So what happened is they decided to send some of the Native students there. But then a lot of the white reformers at that time started protesting, like this one group, Friend of the Indians. And they started protesting that because they felt that they wanted to have Native people model themselves after white America, and they wanted also black America to model themselves after white America. And so they decided to start an entire federal boarding school system. So in 1879, in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, was established as the first boarding school. And the children, Pratt had, ended up going to a lot of the plains areas. They sent the students there. The young people, they arrived to cold floors because it wasn't completely furnished. But what ended up happening was that within the next 25 years, they had several off-reservation and some on-reservation boarding schools across the country. And these students, when they went there, some of them went there very young at, maybe even 4 years old, some even younger. And some of them stayed all the way till they were 20. So sometimes they were away for quite a while. Some were able to go home in the summer or on breaks. Some were not. And so and it was very militarized. When the youth first ended up going to the boarding school in the late 1800s. In the early 20th century, their hair was cut completely. They had kerosene put on them because it was just assumed that all Native people had lice, and so they would dump them in kerosene. If they spoke their native language, if they prayed in their language, if they did anything, or if they did songs in their language, they discouraged that, and at times they were even punished. I know that I've done several interviews with elders. They were put into closets for several hours as young children, or they even had the students punish their own. And so I remember one time past Professor Frank LaPena, who had also gone to Stewart Indian Boarding School, said that the boys, they had them stand and spread their legs wide, and then they had other little boys crawl who had maybe done something that spoke their language or something, and so they had them crawl, and the other boys would hit them as they went by, and if any of the little boys didn't hit them hard enough, then they would have to go through, he called it the gauntlet, because he said he went through that, in boarding school. And he's passed now, but he was one of our early Native Studies professors here at Sac State. Mm-hmm. And then I'd heard other elders, because I was really interested in education, and I still am. But I was very fortunate to be able to interview several people, including family members who had gone to boarding school. And just to give an idea, even in the generation before me, how many people were going to boarding school and what it did to families, was that, for example, my Uncle Punky, who I was very close to, and some cousins, had been sent up to Chemawa Indian Boarding School in Oregon. Mm-hmm. Then my uncle, who was my grandfather's brother, Uncle Charlie, he ended up being sent to Stewart Indian School in Nevada. Then my aunties ended up being sent to Sherman Indian School in Riverside. So imagine a family when your family is just taken when they're young kids and just sent to all these different places. My grandparents went to up to Hoopa Indian Boarding School. And so I'm that generation, because I am an elder now, that I had talked with all of them about their experiences. And then I'd married my husband, Dr. Steve Crum. He was a professor over at Davis, but he was the first Native person to earn of any profession or any area to earn a PhD from Nevada. And he was Western Shoshone, and his parents were out in Nevada at Duck Valley Reservation. Their first language was Shoshone. They learned English, and they were forced to learn English within boarding schools. But it so happened that his father had also gone to Stewart, and his aunties had gone to Sherman in Southern California. So the first time I went back to Duck Valley Reservation with him was after we married, and I went back there, and I was really scared, because I thought, wow, traditionally we should have went back before marrying, but we kind of did that pretty quickly. And so when I went back, I was a little bit nervous, because it was like I'm showing up already in your family, like it or not, basically, and so... But I had such a warm welcome, because his auntie, as soon as I said who my family was, they're like, oh, Claire, oh, yeah. Hey, this is Claire Moorhead's niece. Oh, this is Lila Moorhead's niece. And they would tell it, they were excited and said, take pictures of us and take it back to your family and show them what we look like today. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking about their relationships are closer than a lot of families today, because if you're there from age 5 up to 18 or something like that, and you're there all school year, you're sharing a dorm together, you're eating together, you're going to classes together, any playtime,
Well, and I'm curious about how that played out too, because you're talking about these family members who were sent off in different directions, and yet you still talk about them as family. So that vast amount of time that they spent away from home didn't break the bond, right? So you're saying they came back and they were still family, even though they spent all this time.
Yes, it caused trauma. I mean, a lot of historical trauma, especially with the beatings, because it changed a little bit with John Collier started having the New Deal and such. they started changing a little bit and loosening up. So I had one very good friend when I was in my 20s and early 30s. My best friend was an elder who had gone to Stewart Indian Boarding School in Nevada. And she said, oh, we would just get beat for everything. And then I was telling her about an article and later a book that Dr. Brenda Child had written on boarding schools. And I was explaining that one of them were talking about resistance and runaway within the young people. And she got all excited because she says, did I tell you ever about Stewart? She says, the cook, they didn't like Indian kids. That's what she had said. So she says, some of my friends, we saw that he would take his pipe. He would always smoke a pipe cooking, and he would just dump the ashes into our food, or if they spit, they would just spit in our food. And then one day the kids saw that and they said, well, we're not going to, put up with that. And she said that they went in and started tearing up the kitchen. They started running away. And she said, I didn't go anywhere. I stayed there. And I said, really, why didn't you? And she says, where was I going to go? I'm from Northern California. I'm not from the desert in Nevada. Mm-hmm. So where am I going to go? So I just have to stay there. And in fact, my father-in-law at one time had run away and made it all the way from Stewart Indian School, Nevada, which is near Carson City, all the way up to Duck Valley, which is, by car, it's an hour and 45 minutes past Elko, Nevada. Mm-hmm. So he ran away and made it all the way home. Wow. So some of them, runaway was very common. Up at Chemawa, my uncle said that many times he was older, and so my cousin Franklin was crying. He wanted to go home, so they would try to run away. But when they ran away, that they would get caught and beaten, when they got back. And so Jenny said that she stayed there, and she said that she saw other people resisting, but she said that she just thought, I better make the best I can from it. So different responses happened. Like, some of the children resisted. They kept speaking their language in private. There's a book, Viola Martinez, California Paiute, which actually I called her Aunt Vi when I was growing up, because in the book she says that Claire Moorhead was her best friend, and that was my grandmother's sister. So those are my aunties. And so she said that in the book they'd even go up in the trees and speak their language, so that people wouldn't hear them. Yeah. And so I see that as resistance activity. Mm-hmm. And then my great auntie Lila, she said that she continued to do her prayer songs and talk, but away from the matrons. That's all resistance activity. And then some of the kids, like Jenny had said, that she tried to just go along with the program because she was scared of getting hit, and she said she didn't feel like she had anywhere to go. So some did that. And then a lot of the children, it was interesting, after they grew up and they left boarding schools, some went home. A lot went into the military, because if we think about it, boarding school was very regimented. Yeah. You do this at, 7 a.m., you make your bed, you get in line, you march over to get your food, you stand at the table, you wait for the bell to ring, then you all sit down together. It's very regimented. Yeah. You march over to your class, bells ring, all the time. And so it's very regimented. So a lot went in the military. A lot ended up going into prisons. And if we think about it, because people weren't able to, had a hard time adjusting when they came out. But then when we think about prisons, that's another very regimented, type of place, very institutional. Mm-hmm. And so, so went home and ended up with other jobs at the boarding schools. They did teach a lot of the boys like mechanics and such like that. The girls, they would teach typing and also house cleaning, because they thought house cleaning was the thing that women should do back then. And that led to a lot of the young women cleaning other people's houses. My mother, or working like in agriculture, Yeah. So my mother and different people had worked in the fields, and my grandmother also worked in the fields, but also house cleaning for different people. And so all of that is such a painful educational history. Yeah. But then some, like my Aunt Vi, she decided to go. She was one of the first people to go to I think it's Santa Barbara's Teachers College at that time. And she became one of the first elementary school teachers in the LA area.
Oh, wow. It is painful, having to hear about the reality of what happened to the generations that you're talking about. At the same time, I feel very thankful that there was some resistance, right? Because these are things that could have been erased about the culture. And I'm just wondering now, I imagine, use the word trauma, and these are kind of things that could be generational, right?
Yes.
They could affect generation after a generation who didn't have to go to those boarding schools. So I want to hear about how this has affected you personally, and really how it has informed your work as an educator.
Well, it was kind of interesting because I actually didn't have any ideas of going into a university and making it my career here.
Yeah.
I actually very early on, I too had went into the Army. I went in the 70s, and it was right after the Vietnam War. And yes, that makes me an older person. But when I went in, I also was extremely athletic at the time. I was running 5 miles a day, different things. So when I went in and I wanted to go into helicopter crew chief. Oh, very few women in that profession. And so it was like, at that time, they didn't allow women into the regular Army. And so they had the WACS, the Women's Army Corps. So I was in the actually absolute last class of the Women's Army Corps. Wow. And then I was in one of the first classes of going into co-ed going into co-ed when we start learning our MOS or our profession. And so that was really difficult. But then I went on leave, and I was not AWOL, but I was out with some friends, and I was on the back of a motorcycle, and we had a crash. Oh, no. And so I broke my back, and they did surgery. I was actually paralyzed from the waist down for a while. They took a piece of my hip, put up there. So I ended up being sent to the operation was done in a civilian hospital. I was sent to a military hospital in Long Beach. Then they sent me up to Letterman Army Hospital in San Francisco that doesn't exist anymore. It was out on the Presidio. And so I was in a body cast for 10 months. But as a body cast, I thought, well, what do I do now? I'm not going to be on flight status. I'm not going to be doing what. So I thought, maybe I should think about education. And so I started the City College at San Francisco. The professors there, one of them, Valerie Mathis, she was a history professor there. To this day, she still stays in contact, but it's kind of funny. She says, how could I not remember you? You couldn't sit down in a seat for long, so you prop yourself up at the back of the room, and you have a body cast from your neck to your hips. And so how could I not remember you in the class? And so she actually taught ethnic studies classes. She taught Native American studies, Native American history, and such. And so I became really interested in that area. And she actually made the appointment for me, and she said, you're doing really well, and you need to transfer. And so she made an appointment at UC Berkeley, told me how to get over there, and by BART, and I went over for the appointment. I was very naive back then. I didn't even understand what it really meant to go to Berkeley. And I know that sounds crazy because people say Berkeley or Stanford or different places, everybody's like, oh, wow, those are, very competitive. I thought maybe it was something like applying to a city college where you just, that time, walked in the office and you paid your $15 or $10 and you're in and stuff. That was way back then. I know it's higher now in price. But it was really funny because I went there. They told me what classes I needed to get. They told me the grades I had to get. Then I went back at the city college and took those classes, earned those grades. And I went back and I just said, so where do I fill out the paperwork to enter? And the counselor is looking at me and he says, have you even applied? No, that's what I came here to do today. It was like I was so naive about that. Yeah. And then they explained to me what this all was. It was competitive. So I ended up getting in there and transferring over and went into ethnic studies, Native American studies. No regrets about that. Then I thought about becoming a high school teacher. And so I did that, and I went out and worked with different Indian education programs around the area, including out at Concord. I did ones in Pittsburgh. Then I ended up getting hired down at Fremont as the Native American resource teacher, earned a secondary teaching credential. Then I went back to the Newberry Library. They were having a program on training tribal college teachers and high school teachers on integrating Native history into U.S. history classrooms. So I went back for that type of training and found that, wow, research, archives, these are pretty interesting. I found pictures of Tolowa Dene people. I started seeing, wow, they have this, information back here, and started looking at the Smithsonian and the National Archives, and I started getting really excited, and I came back and I thought, I don't think I'm finished with my education. Yeah. And I started to apply to a CSU. And when I came in, the person I was looking at, U.S. history person, and the person I met with was chair of the department, who, I'm going to say it, he was awful. He was very racist. He had said, we've never had an Indian apply. And he says, minorities don't make good teachers. He was awful.
Oh, geez.
And he said how he made a black woman, a student, leave his class in tears. And I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, I don't want to come here. And on the phone, when he wasn't listening to me, when he didn't see me, he seemed real positive, because he says, wow, you have these grades from Berkeley and you took these history classes, and he was, really wanting me to come in there.
Yeah.
And then when I got there, it was completely different. And then he ended up telling me, before they would even look at my application, I had to take about 4 or 5 graduate seminars, and I thought, before you even look at my work? And I had brought my transcripts, and he never looked at them. And he just sit there making all of these accusations. So I left there. I was mad. I was really angry. I just picked up my stuff, and I thought, I'm a high school teacher. I'm enjoying myself with Indian education. I don't need this, and I kind of thought that's how graduate school was. And then some friends actually talked with me and said, you should try again. And I went over to San Francisco State and walked in. And to tell you the truth, I had a little bit of an attitude when I walked in because of what happened.
Well, you had this experience.
And so I've had this experience. So I walked in, and that department chair, I was trying to look for a master's in history again. He says, he looks at my transcripts right away, and he says, you want to apply here for a master's in history? I said, yes. And it was back then where it wasn't computers. Everybody did things either typed out or written. He says, I'll be right back. He runs down the office. He comes back, and he had the application. He says, do you want to take some time and fill it out in my office? And I said, I was sitting there. I thought, oh, I can't fill it out right now. I need to go home and think about what I want to say. And he says, oh, we really want you here. And he was really encouraging. And then I realized, okay, it was just that person. And I'd already looked at, with being in ethnic studies about, racism and stuff. So I thought, well, okay, fine. And then I ended up applying to UC Davis and did my MA in history there. Then I went back to do a PhD in ethnic studies, focusing on Native Americans at Berkeley for the PhD. But then you were asking me, why? Because of the history of what happened in the family with education. How did that, form what I wanted to do? That's why I went into ethnic studies. And that's why I went into Native American studies, because I thought there has to be a way to educate, our community and younger people about our histories. And, whether those histories are painful or not, to also show, yes, the history as it happened, but also show those acts of resistance and those times that, our people are intelligent, people who make decisions. And that was before any education. That was even pre-contact. And then I'm not going to tell it because it would be too long here. But there's one of my favorite stories talks about Tolowa being removed to the Yurok Reservation. All kinds of things happened. And they decided not to do removal and left and went back. basically said, we're here at Smith River. If you want to fight us now, we're armed. And the scouts came back and said every man, woman, and child was armed. And they were saying, we're going to stay at our homeland.
Wow.
And so instead, they realized the U.S. Army, because they're going after I found this in the military records back in D.C., and I thought they made that stand and that decision, and that's why we're there today. That's why we wouldn't have had Tallawahd people. They would have probably intermarried into other groups. I wouldn't be able to see my nieces and cousins and different people in regalia and dance, So I saw that as like an ultimate act of resistance. And that happened, I saw, throughout the boarding school system. And I wanted to look at it and say, well, we can't go back and say that we're going to live in, a world like it was pre-contact. That's just not, reality. So how do we live in this world and, not only survive but thrive today?
Yeah.
Well, we have our different tribal nations. And so, how do we educate our young people to not forget who they are, to continue to be Native people, and yet be able to gain the skills to be able to further develop Native nations or tribal nations today? And how do we interact? So that's what I started thinking, and that's why when Sac State actually had the job announcement and they wanted somebody to teach Native American studies, Native history, focus on California Native people, I thought, well, I did something I told all my students not to do. I only applied to one job.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to be here at Sac State.
Oh, thank you.
And so it's the only job I had applied to, and I really, I like the diversity of students at Sac State. And with the Native American College, I see that as a way that with all coming in, whoever, it's open to all students. We're really focusing on our tribal communities and our tribal nations and developing leaders, and whether or not they go work for a tribe when they, earn their degrees, or whether they work in the larger society, that hopefully the skills and leadership skills that they develop here at Sac State can translate, into that. And all of this without forgetting who they are, minoring in Native American studies, and also having different faculty as mentors, being able to go through as a cohort, because we had a climate survey in 2018 that showed two groups were the least comfortable here at Sac State as far as students, and that was Black and Native students. And so I feel like having the Black Honors College that's very successful with Dean Masupier, have already launched off and started and doing great things, that the Native American College, we're not going to be honors college, we're going to, be a Native American college, open to all students at all levels. But how do we end up, helping to create these leaders and giving them the skills to move forward?
Now, you mentioned the archives that you discovered while attending Berkeley. And I guess that got me, wondering about, how that affected you, but also how that might tie into some of the things that are happening today, like with the mandated repatriation of Native remains and Native artifacts, and just how all of that. I guess I want to get your perspective on it, because it's got me thinking and me wondering, and I'm curious about it. But tell me about that, how those archives affected you and maybe expanded your own understanding, and maybe what the implications are about bringing that information back to the tribe.
Yes. Well, when I was a student at Berkeley, I started looking at some of the university archives there. Then when I was out teaching at Fremont as the teacher, like I said, that I went back to the Newberry Library in Chicago, became very interested in archival research there. And that really started me on a path of wanting to see what other people are saying about us in the archives, and also having different interviews that were, completed early on to see what people were saying. And so I ended up, when I was doing my PhD, I was really interested in archives. Luckily, my husband, he was a historian also, so he was very interested. So we did it together, going to different ones.
Wow, that's great.
He was researching for his work. He wrote a book, A History of Western Shoshone, and actually he passed away unexpectedly a couple years ago, but he had just finished a book, Indians in Higher Education. And so I will be trying to, finish that up and get it out to publication because it gives a history of Native people. So we talked about all of these things, We had a wonderful marriage for, over 30 years. So anyway, I started also looking at things like when I had heard about these massacres, because it's in our oral history, that happened within, our communities in northwestern California and throughout California. And so then I started thinking, well, I was the military. Military always keeps records of everything. So I went through the military records and National Archives. I started looking at anthropological records in the Smithsonian, and also just all different archives all over the country, National Archives at San Bruno, and then going up to university archives up in Oregon and Washington and all over the place. And so I started seeing different records and piecing together because, as you can tell, I talk a lot. And so I also like storytelling. But really, when you're looking historically, to tell a story, you need different viewpoints to piece together what's happening. And I noticed in a lot of these, that the Native voice was very muted or almost non-existent. When I looked through every newspaper article from the beginning of newspapers in northwestern California all the way up to current day. And I would find a lot of interesting things in editorials. So then it started me interviewing people. And so I started in my 20s, I was interviewing people, and now when I look back at those interviews, I cringe and I think, why didn't I ask this question instead of this one? But I'm really thankful that I have those interviews for what was said, because it gives us a little bit more of that history. And so I interview people about boarding schools, I interview people about identity, and about what they'd heard about different massacres and such. And they were horrendous, the genocide that people went through. I mean, we had a Native student here years ago. We were going to have a genocide conference. Dr. Alexander Kamini from Ethnic Studies had started those because he was a survivor from the Rwandan genocide. And so in '98, we had one of our first genocide conferences here at Sac State. And I was a brand new professor here in '98. And I came in, and he was a senior faculty, and he said, I want you to chair a session for the genocide conference. And of course I said yes. I didn't want to tell him at that time that I'd never chaired a session in my life. I had presented, but I'd never chaired. And then I was fresh out of graduate school. And so I quietly just said, oh yes. Well, he gave me eyewitness accounts. Life-changing. It was life-changing because in detail, I don't really want to go into detail here, but in detail of what was happening during the genocides by people who were there, or people whose their job was to walk through the killing fields. So it was just amazing. We had people, I had one of the presenters pass out and land in my lap. I had people walking in and out, crying, tears, and rightfully so. Well, then the next time he put me on the planning committee. So Dr. Boatomo Supie, Dr. Alexander Kamini, and myself were working together on these. And so I started looking at Native genocide a lot more and bringing in California Native voices. So we had a student here, and he was from Robinson Rancheria, Shea Duncan, and he came to my office, and he had this very poignant song, and it was his grandmother talking about the massacre that had happened at Clear Lake, Bloody Island Massacre, that it's called. So the interesting thing, I just finished writing my paper for that same panel. I'd asked him to be on the panel. And mine was called "The River Ran Red with Their Blood," because it talked about when the people who were trying to survive were escaping, because we have round doorways in our redwood plank houses or cedar plank houses up north. And so when people came out, their heads were being cut off, and bayonets were being put into even pregnant women, because it said that, that one way to kill a generation is to kill the reproduction.
Yeah.
And so babies were thrown into the fire. I mean, these interviews were, it was just awful, to hear what had been passed down, because that's not what you get into the newspaper accounts at all.
Yeah.
I mean, the newspapers on these same accounts were reporting, we came in and, not one soldier was killed. Not, that they were no match against us. And I'm thinking, well, you went in when they were praying within their houses. They were doing ceremony, gathered together, praying. So you don't walk in your prayer house, where you're doing your ceremony fully armed and waiting for a massacre. And so they would light the houses on fire, and then people would run out, And so when people were at ceremony together, that's when a lot of the massacres occurred up northwestern California with the Tolowa. So anyway, people would run down into the rivers and breathe up through the reeds. And they say that the rivers, it was just red with blood of their families, but they stayed under that water, and that's how a lot of them escaped, was breathing up through those reeds. Well, that was the same thing at the Clear Lake with the Bloody Island Massacre, and within that song and within his paper that he wrote, he talked about how they breathed up through the reeds. And I remember sitting in my office, and I was in tears, because I was like, our people went through here, they're hundreds of miles apart, and they went through this, very similar type of thing. And so, and he asked me, he was so humble and so brilliant, and he asked me, is this okay to present? He was the only student presenting, everybody else was California native scholars. I said, not only is it okay, it's amazing. And so I remember when he did present, then he had to leave, but there was a woman that came up to me, and she happened to have been a Holocaust survivor, and I saw her tattoos, and she came up and said, could you tell that young man how amazing his talk was, and how much courage it had for him to stand up there. He even brought a big cannonball, and he held it up, and he said, this is the justice that my people got. And so it was pretty heavy. So it was amazing. So that happened when I was here, at Sac State, and ethnic studies has been, an amazing department to work with people, and having other colleagues see value in that work.
Yeah.
And so I started getting interested, in that with the history. And I can't talk about that in every class. I mean, it's pretty heavy. I have to myself, as a human being, kind of be prepared to talk about something like that.
Yeah.
And so, so that's one reason. I saw our students getting interested. They've heard the whole story, so I think through education, talking about it, we also are processing.
Yeah. Well, and you have this wealth of knowledge about, the Native American experience through history, about your culture. And you said that you talk a lot, but I could listen a lot to what you're saying. It's wonderful. But I guess what I'm thinking is that you got all of this, or you gained so much of it through your academic journey. And I think this is why I asked my last question, because I guess I just have this desire for it to be shared with the Native American people that can be impacted by this knowledge. And so I guess there's not an easy answer for how that could happen, but I understand that you are leading the Native American college here on campus. And hopefully that's a step in that direction.
Yes, and I think it's also bringing community, because those are all things that I learned through academics, but things that, are things that you just do with the Native community, and it's part of life. Very early on, I had mentioned my friend Jenny. I thought she was amazing because even after she'd gotten beaten in Stewart Indian boarding school for doing anything Native, her and her husband actually became wonderful bead workers, and she did basketry. And how I met her was through Indian education, and I was her assistant. And so as she taught our young people, our kids, how to do these different traditional, Native different crafts and different artwork. If you're at a table, you can't really teach somebody that's, 5 people away. So she would teach me, and then I would teach them. So her and I did a lot of things together like that. Also with my uncle and different people, we went out and we did gather, medicine root together up home. When he went out fishing for salmon, I went with him. I rowed the boat. I was awful at rowing. We didn't have a motor on our boat. So there was so many things that I took basket weaving when I was from different Native people in my 20s. From different really acclaimed Native, I feel blessed to have met them and worked with them, Native basket weavers. And then my family had gone through a lot of things. For example, one of my uncles who had married my mother's sister, my Aunt Diane, he'd gone up through 2 Supreme Court cases and won both of them over, land and such, and fishing and rights. Fishing rights on the Klamath River. And then also things that come up you think about, it brings to light these things, that happen when people talk about changes that might be happening in the federal government. And I said, well, my family actually, went through, because the reservations are on federal land. And so when anything happens, we need to deal with that. And so in my 20s, when I was going to Berkeley, there was a whole fishing rights, that had been, and several members of my family were arrested, some of them illegally arrested. It was on the front page of San Francisco Chronicle, Oakland Tribune. Really large ones. A cousin of mine had been picked up when she was working at a dry cleaners. I know I'd been up fishing that same summer. My mom told me I was going to be, I might be picked up. Later it came out that all of our phones were tapped. And,
wow.
So going to school even was this traumatic thing at times, because I'm going to class at Berkeley and I'm thinking, at any time, federal agents might walk in like they did with my cousin and pick me up, So as a Native person, you go through this, and we've been to different protests, and luckily everything was proven that it was actually illegal to have done what they did. So it ended up, winning in those cases. But there's just been so much, that has happened, and that's the personal side of it. I've been talking with you because we're at a Sac State podcast more about the academic.
Yeah.
But there's all these things as Native people, and I'm not, I am not alone in this. Native people go through all kinds of things, high rates of suicide and, all these different things within our communities. And so that's one reason I really wanted to work with our young people, to be able to give them tools. So, I don't know if you had another question. I'll start going on.
I think that I was hoping maybe for an update on the Native American College. So maybe you could just tell us, where we're at, what's the status, and what to look forward to.
Oh, well, I'm really excited about it. I was rather surprised, because I remember I made the decision this last year that I was going to retire. And so I was really excited about that, and I decided to go through a program called FERPing, which I always thought sounded like a disease, but it's actually a retirement program where you work half-time. So I was working half-time in ethnic studies. For the last 5 years, I've been chair of the ethnic studies department. Before that, I was director of Native American studies. So I decided to work also part-time with President Wood. I was really happy to have him as our new president, and pretty exciting, not only because he wears cool kicks, but, because he brings in different perspectives.
Yeah.
So he called me in for an 8 a.m. meeting or 8:30 meeting, and I thought, oh, good, I'm a morning person anyway. So went in, and all of a sudden, him, Mark Wheeler, his advisor, senior advisor, and Anthony Burris, who's part of the tribal affairs within the campus now and advisor to the president, were all there. And so President Wood said that he really was excited about a new initiative. And he explained the type of person he was looking for, and I was thinking, wow, I can see where he's going with this. And then when he asked me, could you be the inaugural dean, I said, well, one major problem, I'm retired.
Yeah.
And I said, I mean, like I severed my relationship with the university last week. So he went out of the room, and he came back, and he said, well, if you cancel it within 30 days, you can continue on.
Oh, my goodness.
And I said, well, I need to think about this. So I
Yeah.
took about a week and talked with different people in the local tribal community, talked to people on campus, thought about it. And then what I started thinking about is maybe part of the impact we could have with students and training them to go into leadership, with all students, training them to go into leadership within Native tribal communities, and what kind of skills, and for them to learn about what building a nation building is, and all of these different things. And then I realized I need to accept, because I'm already thinking about the programming. I'm not thinking about if I'm going to accept anymore. Yeah. And that's why I did. It's really for the students, because for me, it's always been about, the students. I could have gone off and retired. And in fact, I had plans. I could have done all kinds of things. But I really wanted to set the base for this and have it be something that, carries on and makes positive impact. So part of something I thought was kind of humorous that came out actually within the last few days is some of the Native faculty on campus, they put in an article. News from Native California is a quarterly and very well read throughout the state. They surprised me with this big, this has been your impact, and that happy retirement basically. So I read it and I thought, oh wow, but I'm not retiring, just kidding now. And it just came out in a quarterly, and it was like a beautiful article. Yeah. So then I ended up writing, and also Dr. Rose Warsolger and Dr. Anthony Burris and Joaquin Tarango all joined in. And we wrote a follow-up article that just came out this last week, basically why I didn't retire. And so it's because I didn't want everybody, a Native country to think she's retired. I thought I would rather let them know about what we're doing with the Native American College. So let me tell a little bit of what some components of it is, because I just don't want to let this get away without talking about it.
Sure.
And that's that really the students will be coming in as cohorts. So they're going to come in as in their first year, as their first year experience, and they'll be minoring in Native American Studies. And part of Native American Studies, they will be taking classes on Native sovereignty, tribal governments, and also Native leadership classes. They will have faculty mentors when they're first coming in groups, maybe 5 or 6 per mentor. Various people on campus faculty have agreed to be mentors. And then some of our seniors that are in Native American Studies and such will serve as peer mentors to some of them. And that's really exciting. We have some really great students on campus right now. And so they would like to also work with them. I will be reaching out. I've already started, but I'll be reaching out to a lot of the different departments and deans and chairs to work with what type of GE path that we can formulate that will be really, I think really good for the students.
Yeah.
And also working closely, we're going to have programming where various tribes throughout California, especially locally, will either come in person or on Zoom with the students. So if we're talking about tribal court system, why do we have tribal courts? We perhaps can have a tribal judge come in and talk about, that aspect, or somebody in federal Indian law. If we're talking about NAGPRA, Native American Graves and Repatriation, we can have somebody come in that's from local communities or in California, usually it's in the cultural division, can talk about what they do there. Or if we talk about education, or if we talk about social services, there's all these different areas of different tribal nations that we want, to go over with the students.
Yeah.
But we thought it would be really good because we want that interaction and to have them not only read and for the professor to talk about it, but them to actually be able to interact with people who are working in the field.
Yeah. So when will this launch with the first cohort?
Fall of 2025.
Wow,
and
that's coming.
So we are scurrying and moving, and I'm also having some really exciting experiences. The other night I had a conversation on Zoom with the University of Alaska Southeast from Juneau and the chancellor, vice chancellor, and some other folks. And that was really good because they're trying to do, also link with local Native community, but they're in a totally different situation. They have about 24% of their student population is Native. And so that's really large.
Yeah.
But we're talking about what kind of MOUs, like, memorandums of understanding that we want to develop. And, of course, asking the different people we're developing these MOUs with is, what do they want to see us do? What are their expectations, because we're actually asking them, to send your sons, daughters, send your community members, send folks that are interested, reach out and have this connection. So we really want that linkage where they tell us what they want also, because it's, I think it's really long overdue that universities need Native students even, might be the smallest and most vulnerable population on campus. And as far as a percentage in the larger United States, we might be a very small percentage, but I think it's really important because these are the first peoples of this land.
Yeah.
And so much has happened historically that, this, I think it's long overdue.
Yes, long overdue. That's what I was thinking in my head. Well, unfortunately, we do have to wrap up. And in lieu of our traditional lightning round, I just want to ask you one thing. Being that you gave up your retirement to remain part of the Hornet family, what would you be doing now if you were fully retired?
Oh, I had already contacted somebody. We have our dances that we still do. Like, for example, usually you do Nadosh when it's winter solstice, because that's the shortest day of the year, and so everything starts anew from there and growing again. So it's kind of like New Year's. Yeah. And so you give thanks for everything that has come before, and you give thanks, for all good things that are coming up the next year. So a lot of times I hear about our families will say, oh, my little girl can't dance because we don't have the regalia. So I love doing necklaces, beadwork. I love doing work with shells, and so and basketry. So I was going to. There had been somebody who had already agreed to be my mentor to start making the little girl skirts. And I'm not thinking about making them to sell. I just want to make as many as possible so that it gets them out dancing and continuing the culture and continuing history, and doing necklaces that coordinate with that so that when they get out there, they feel really good. Like, look what I have. I have, really nice regalia on. And that's some of the things. Also spending time with my little granddaughter, Lila, and my sons, and I have nieces, nephews, great nieces, So I'm at that age. Also, my mother is my only still living, parent left, and she's an elder. She lives up on the reservation at Smith River, as is my sister and different folks, hoping to get home a lot more. So, and also different events. I mean, Sac State, every fall we have fourth Friday of September, we have California Native American Day. We usually take over about 120 Sac State students for volunteering. Well, we don't take them. They meet us there. Hello, risk management. Yes. I'm not doing anything. So they go over there, and they really are the heart of helping out. And this is students, from all different backgrounds, races, ethnicities, go over there, and so appreciative for them. And there's a lot of community events. So for years I've been organizing. Now there's going to be different other faculty organizing. So I was kind of looking forward to having a folding chair and just watching everybody.
I guess I'm not entirely surprised that your plan was to continue to give more of yourself to others. So, let me just thank you, first of all, for your tenacity in pursuing understanding, and for, giving up your retirement to be here and continue to give back. And thank you for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Beyond J is a production of University Communications at Sacramento State. Our producer is Jonathan Morales. Photography and videography by Bibiana Ortiz. And editing by me, your host, Phillip Altstatt. If you liked this episode, please leave us a review and consider following us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have questions or comments, email us at communications@csus.edu and visit us online at csus.edu/news/beyondj.